Ladies and gentlemen, this presentation is brought to you by The Greatness Continues LLC. And you are now tuned into the greatest conversations, starring Reese Two Times, Shaka the Wise, Sensei J, the Masked Man, Big Z, and your host, D. Jones. Once again, you are tuned into the greatest conversations.
Did y'all ever ask your coworkers about who read books?
Yeah, bro. A lot of my coworkers read books.
You got some intellectual coworkers.
I must be. But half of my team is like males, and half of my team is females. So that's a good. That's how a lot of our teams are actually.
Decent ratio, yeah.
And everybody reads. I don't know who y'all hang out with.
Right.
I was asking my brother and his fiance last week. Those are the only two people I asked, but he reads a lot and like he's getting her to read a lot. But he said the same thing we said. He said even if you're not reading, we live in a day and age now where like they got podcasts and audiobooks. And, you know, people are on the road or on the move all the time, so you don't have to be like tied to a book. Yeah. As long as you're being informed on something.
Yeah. I just feel like information is still better.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like it's better from a book.
I don't think that's
true.
Because
a lot of people sometimes too get their perspective, but not for like what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I guess that comes down.
Yeah, but like
that comes down to like how people have different preferences on how they learn, like whether it's visual or like someone teaches it to them, or if they like
So you think it's
have
better
a
for
direct
people
example or something like that? Like some people prefer to actually read it off the paper and like sit and like conceptualize themselves in their mind. Some other people probably prefer to just hear someone explain it to them.
I feel like the further
actually, quick question. So do you guys think do you think multitasking is like a myth, or do you think it can actually be done? Because I think if you depending on how you answer, then I think an audiobook or something that you listen to, you might not be able to retain the same.
Multitasking is a myth.
So I feel like if you are glued to a book,
you can, but it's not a smart thing to do.
You can, but it's people say that I can multitask and nothing's ever gonna go wrong. Like I can perfectly do two things at the same time.
Yeah.
But it's not true. It's a myth.
I personally multitask to learn better.
Yeah, like it's a skill that you can like train yourself to do, but you always know that there's gonna be one.
You're putting more percentage in something than you are.
Yeah. Big Z will like
especially driving.
And I have to play.
That's the main one.
I have to play a video game while listening to a lecture, or I won't retain a lecture at all. Because if I sit there and watch a lecture, it's not interesting me at all. But I've learned that playing video games, my brain is just really open to like that's coming through the screen, or when I'm talking to you guys. So I'll play a lecture, and I'll just like have a conversation with my professor during the lecture while playing a game, and it's working. So I'm not sure if that's like true multitasking.
I feel like you kind of cheated the system with that because the purpose of video games is kind of so essentially what you're doing is you're listening to a lecture while playing video games. Typically, when you play a video game, your body gets into that state where it is very
at rest.
Sensitive to external stimuli. Because you're looking at a TV, you're listening to sounds, visual cues, and stuff like that. So you put yourself in a state where you're more receptive to the lecture, if that makes sense.
Okay.
That's interesting because I feel like I don't like I can't relate to that only because when we get in the chat together and like we just all start talking and stuff, I have to play or just not play anything at all for me to really like engage. I feel like if I'm like engaged in like a single player game, I have to like be so focused on that I can't have like surrounding noise.
Well, what game are you playing?
I feel like I'm like that depending on the game.
Yeah,
That's why I applaud people who stream,
it-
because like
it
streaming, I feel
differs
like
by
that can be a skill.
personality and game stuff like that.
Yeah. Like if it's a game I'm really enjoying and there's a point like I started getting like that with Final Fantasy after so long. I was like, I can't play this when we were talking because I'm like I ended up starting it over at one point.
But Final
after
Fantasy I feel like story-driven games are very.
That's the type of games that usually.
It'd be harder to try.
Like, Big Z only plays
Yeah.
like Overwatch shooting games, or if it is a story game, it's a slow pace.
Because I can do that if I'm playing COD. Bro, I got music playing.
Yeah.
I got the NBC playing and shit like that. Like
Yeah.
I can do that. But if I'm trying to play Control, I'll mute you. When I'm playing single player games. I'm not listening to anything you're saying.
Wait, so kind of going back to the whole multitasking. So if you think multitasking is a myth, do you still feel that if you listen to an audiobook, you'll still retain as much information as you would if you were just like all your focus was just centered like reading a hard copy book?
Well, it depends. So going back to that example I used earlier, when he plays video games and he can still retain a lecture, if you can put yourself into that mental state where you're able to retain information, then I feel like it's possible. But it also depends on the task. Like I feel like true multitasking, when you're trying to like, I don't know, do two different. I feel like the definition of multitasking is trying to do like two dissimilar activities at the same time.
Right.
I feel like that's impossible.
Like make it like going clockwise and then going counterclockwise with your foot.
Right. Like if you can multitask like doing with similar activities, I feel like it's a little bit easier. But I feel like there's definitely a lot of research that shows that the more time you spend, if you carve your time up instead of trying to multitask, you're more likely to get through your workload if you carve your time up and split it based on the task instead of trying to do everything at once.
Yeah, because they have exercise for that too. Because if you write like your first and last name, like the first exercise you'll write like I'll put like John Smith. You write J and then S and then O and then M. Like if you just do that, you'll time yourself. But then if you do a second activity where you just write John all the way through and then just write Smith all the way through, like your time is definitely shaved by like half.
And just think about all the times where you're like, this happens a lot actually. I think it's when you're writing something, when you're like talking to somebody and you're writing something, and then you write down what you're saying. You know, instead of like trying to copy what you were trying to write.
That's why there's always that percentage of, you know what I mean? Like, you can get better at doing it, but, you know.
Yeah, I think
It's like you said, you got to be in that mindset where you're just, so like whatever task you're doing, those got to be the only tasks. It's like nothing else.
Yeah.
You know, like you're focused on those two things.
I think if somebody wanted to go down the road of multitasking, it just comes down to, again, like practicing. You would have to literally make that your life.
In time management.
Like, because like what you're saying, if somebody wrote John Smith and it was like J.S., like, also plays a role is the fluency and how long it takes your brain to realize that the second letter is here. Because I feel like in a perfect world, if you do that the same amount as somebody who just writes John Smith, like everything held constant, it will take you guys the same length. Like if the multitasker was very proficient in what he did and did that his whole life, like John Smith like this, or just like, you know, like that, versus somebody who did this, it's still the same amount of letters and it's just taking you the same amount of time. So when it comes to multitasking, only thing different is one person's kind of being more complicated when it could be something more simpler and more efficient versus doing it more complicated and risking error. Because it'll take you the same amount of time, but it also takes a person that does this, John Smith, at the same time, more practice, and if someone's talking to him, there's more room for error because his brain is like already tugging two things. You know?
And honestly, like even if you are like, say it's something with your job specifically, so it's something you have to do every day, so you get really good at doing it. Even like when you're really good at doing it, it's something that still puts enough stress on your brain that eventually, like, you know, that can break you down to the point where after so long you end up f***ing up, or there's a small room for error because, you know, you're just like ding 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 until you're like, oh shit, this was supposed to go here. This is like crap, like, and then you're like, dang. My whole world came crashing down.
Like if you're a package handler at like FedEx or something, you know, like you're reading addresses, scanning and verifying all in one motion.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
like-
really good
So,
example.
you know, you're doing a whole bunch of tasks at once, putting it on the truck in like a certain order, and you don't really realize you're doing it because you practice so much. But if some random person came up and started talking to you, you might just start f***ing up because, you know, they might say a key word that in your brain means something else in your brain. And so you might put this package where it's not supposed to be on the truck.
Yeah.
You know? So,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't even catch it because you're multitasking.
It's
And
like
those,
we have
but those tasks are all related to one another too.
Yeah, true.
That's a good point.
Because
Yeah.
you said they have to be like pretty much night and day.
Right. If they're 9 days, almost impossible.
Those are gonna be robots.
Yeah, like with delivering, you gotta focus on driving. You got a device. You gotta scan the package, check the address, find the house, put it in the right place. You know what I mean? It's all this shit. Maybe you got multiple stops to do at one time. So you're like, you got the 2 packages to find the houses. Did you happen to put the package at the right house, or you just swap them around? You know what I mean? It's like
And
there's
then if
someone.
you're trying to multitask, because you do all that while giving a speech on like a TED talk on some,
Right.
some different
Right.
subject.
Yeah, can you talk on the phone to somebody
Right.
while you're doing all that and have a random conversation? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's hard to do.
You know,
It's hard. Eventually, you come to a point where it's just like,
Big Z has
I'm
it.
trying to do too much, and now at some point you're focusing more on one thing, and then you realize, oh yeah, I'm doing this, and then you start doing that,
Task.
and then you know what I mean. Then you start dividing back and forth like teeter totter. Like,
Well, go ahead, because I'm
That's it.
You think